boys and girls. Today we are going to be doing one of my most favorite things, and that is working with clay. Now, I know most of you do not have clay at home, so no worries. We're going to actually make our own clay today using 3 simple ingredients. So you're going to need water. We're going to be making a small batch, so you just need 1/4 of a cup. So also you're going to need some measuring cups so that you can even out and measure the ingredients. So you're going to need 1/4 cup of water. You're going to need salt, just any old salt works. And then you're also going to need flour. And this is just the flour that you would find in the baking aisle. You're also going to need a large bowl and a spatula to mix it. And later on, when we're working with the clay, you might want to have some things that you can press to make textures. I'm using this plastic fork and plastic knife. And then you'll also want to get some saran wrap to put on your table when we're done making the clay and when we're working with it. That way it doesn't stick to the surface. And today we are going to be making these clay self-portraits. So go grab these 3 ingredients, a bowl and a spatula, and some measuring cups, and let's make some clay. All right, boys and girls, now that you have these ingredients, let's go ahead and measure them out. And I've already measured out the 1/4 cup of water, and I've dried my measuring spoon because I don't want the salt and the flour to stick to this cup. So now I'm gonna take the salt and I'm gonna measure out 1/4 of a cup. It's really important that you're measuring it out because the ratio of these ingredients is gonna make a difference with the consistency of our clay. Okay, and so then I'm gonna take my 1/2 cup and I'm going to measure it out. Perfect. Okay, I'll put my flour in there. And then I'm gonna start by mixing it with this spatula. Or if you don't have a spatula and you have a spoon, that's perfect. We're gonna eventually start kneading it with our hands, but you want to get the flour and the salt incorporated into the water pretty well with the spatula first. All right, so now that it's pretty mixed, I'm going to put my hands in it and I'm gonna start kneading it and making sure all this flour at the bottom, flour and salt, gets incorporated. So I know what you're thinking, this kind of looks like cookie dough. And you're right, it does look like cookie dough, but let me just caution you, do not eat this. I don't know if I'm not telling you to do this, but when I was little, I once tasted Play-Doh and I remember it tasted super salty and I never again tasted it. That's exactly what this clay would taste like if you eat it. Because we use so much salt to get the right consistency, it does not taste good. So this is just clay for making art creations, not for eating. All right, so again, you wanna squish it and make sure you get all that loose flour at the bottom. And you really want to knead this for about a minute or 2 to make sure everything gets really incorporated. And you want to do it until it stops sticking to your hand. Okay, and one way to knead it is to press on it with the palm of your hand and then fold it over. So press down with the palm of your hand, fold the dough over. Okay, so now that we've kneaded the dough, you're gonna take it and you're gonna place it into a ball. And then we're gonna place we're gonna put all of the mixing supplies aside. You're gonna wanna put out that saran wrap that I mentioned earlier. So I'm gonna slide that over because this will definitely stick to the table or whatever surface that you're working on. The saran wrap is a smooth surface, and so that's gonna keep it from sticking. So I also have a cup of water that I'm gonna use Sometimes the clay can start to get a little dry, and you'll know that if it starts to crack on the sides, and that way you can just dip your finger in the water and then add a little water to it. You don't want to dip the clay in the water because that's gonna just bring too much moisture to your clay. So now that we have this good amount of clay, like I said earlier, this is a small batch. We're using this for the project that we're gonna work on. So you really won't have any extra. If you wanted to make more so that you could have clay to work with later, you could make it again, or you could double the recipe. So if you were doubling it, it would be a half cup of water, half cup of salt, and 1 cup of flour. And any clay that you don't use that day, you just need to make sure you store in a Ziploc bag or an airtight container so that the air doesn't dry it out. All right, so since we are doing self-portraits, we're gonna start with our ball of clay. And I'm gonna show you some clay techniques that if you know how to do those, you can create anything.
Okay, so our first term is slab. Slab is an even, flat piece of clay. Our second term is coil. Coil is a rope-like shaped piece of clay. Now that you know the terms, let me show you how you make them.
Okay, so now that you know the key words slab and coil, let me show you how to make each of them. So for the slab, you're gonna wanna start and roll the clay in the palms of your hands to make a ball. Then to make the slab, you're gonna press down with the palm of your hand to flatten it out. And there you have it, a slab. Now, just some rules of thumb. You want your slab to be about the thickness of a cookie. You don't want it to be too thick because that's gonna take a long time to dry. But you don't want it to be too thin to where when it dries, it's gonna break. So the thickness of a cookie is a good rule of thumb. So now to make the next term that we learned, coil, you're gonna take your ball of clay and you're gonna start rolling it in between your palms to then flatten it out. And it's gonna create like a snake-like form. Now, these two together, you can create anything. There are endless possibilities of the things that you can create. So for our self-portrait, we're gonna be using slab to create the face, the neck, the shirt, and we'll be using coils for things like the hair, the eye, the nose, and the mouth. So with these two combination of things, we're gonna create our self-portrait. One thing I just wanna show you is how you'll get pieces to stick together. So let's say I make this eye for my self-portrait. I can't just stick it on top of the clay because when it dries, it's gonna fall off. So you're gonna wanna use your water like glue to press down whatever you want to stick together. So I like to, whenever I'm doing clay, I like to set it down and make sure that it's where I want it before I put water, because then it's gonna be harder to tear it apart. But clay is very forgiving, so if you do something you don't like, you can just ball it back up and start again. So that's the key thing, is making sure you put water when you want to join your two pieces together and then smush it down. You can also use things like a fork to create textures. I'm gonna use a fork to create textures in the hair. And that's just a fun tool that you can use. If you have other things that have texture, feel free to use them. But like I said, with our coil and our slab, the possibilities are endless.
So at this point, we have worked on the face, the neck, and the shirt, remembering to glue our pieces together with water. And the next part we're going to focus on are the eyes, nose, and mouth. So this portrait, I'm going to make a boy since the last one I made a girl, so that way you can see how this one turns out. All right, so for this portrait that I'm making today, I'm going to make it a boy since I made my self-portrait yesterday. So if you have short hair, you're definitely going to want to make your ears. If you have longer hair like me, your hair probably covers it, so you don't need to worry about it. For the hair, you can use coils or you can use small slabs. The possibilities are endless, and I want you to be creative. So now that we have created our clay masterpiece, now we have to let it dry. So if you just set it in a sunny place, like next to a window, somewhere that's gonna get some sunlight, it'll take about 2 to 7 days, depending on the size of your clay piece. So since our clay piece is not very thick, it'll probably take about 3 days. If you are not patient like I am, and if you have adult supervision, you can also place this on a non-stick tray and bake in your oven at the lowest temperature. My lowest temperature is 170 degrees, and I baked the one I did yesterday for 2 hours. So you just 2 hours at the minimum, and you want to just check on it. It might need a little bit longer. And so once this dries, then you are free to paint it. Now, the best paint that works is going to be acrylic paint. But I know a lot of you probably don't have acrylic paint on hand and you'd have to go to a craft store to get it. So you can also color it with markers. And then when you're done with the marker, you can seal it with like a Mod Podge. If you don't have Mod Podge, you can create your own by adding water to glue and brushing it on, and it's going to create like a glaze. So the best thing for color would be acrylic paint, but like I said, use what you have on hand, and I'm super excited to see what you all create.